Hi friends, it's your girl Harpo. Welcome to this episode titled Let's Talk Disrespect. Now, I think we've talked about respect and disrespect and boundaries and all that good stuff, in all of our episodes. But today we're going to talk about disrespect explicitly. Now, I did a quick Google search of what the word disrespect actually means because I don't know about you guys, but I really like to have definitions. I'm a very wordy person. I like words. I have a note on my phone that I just add a bunch of cool words into all the time. I love words. And I love reading the definition of words and understanding the words. And so when I look up the word disrespect on Google, it says that disrespect is both a noun and a verb. It says that as a noun, it means a lack of respect or courtesy. And as a verb, it means to show a lack of respect for or to insult. Now, I have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed in the definition of disrespect because I really thought that the definition of disrespect was going to be a little bit more substantial. But it seems like all the definitions and all the explanations for the word disrespect are actually rooted in the concept of, can you guess it? Respect. So I think in talking about disrespect, perhaps we have to go back and we have to talk about the word respect before we can even try and understand and conceptualize disrespect, because it's in the lack of respect that you find disrespect. And so the reason that I want to talk about disrespect in this episode is because it was sparked from a conversation that I was having with my friend Raj, who is the guest of this episode. I was hanging out with her in her office at Pink Chai headquarters one day, and I said, Raj, I just feel like I've been feeling so disrespected for so many months now. I just feel like I keep bumping into a ton of disrespect from people, from places, from things, and just feeling an overall energy of disrespect. And she shared that she had also been experiencing something similar. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about disrespect. It's right there in the title. It says, Let's Talk Disrespect. And it's going to be really interesting because Raj and I, even though, Raj is much older than I am, we're very similar. And I think we relate to one another a lot. I think that we have this warm personality. We have this innate desire to keep peace. We're very non confrontational. We're really giving. We're really kind. And we're just warm bundles of joy. But we experience a lot of bullshit all the time. And I think if you're one of those people listening who's also kind of warm and fuzzy and really giving and loving and super kind and generous, which I mean, we all are. I think we're all that at our core, but sometimes we forget to be those things every single day. But if you're that person, I'm sure you can relate that sometimes you're the one that gets taken advantage of the most. And so if you're one of those people, who gets walked on a little bit easier than others, you get hurt really fast and you're a little bit more sensitive and vulnerable, this episode is for you. We're going to talk about disrespect. And before we do that, we're going to talk about respect. So stay tuned for a lesson on respect and disrespect. Hello, Raj.
Hi, Harpo.
I'm so excited to host you because in the past you've hosted me, and now I'm so excited that the tables have turned.
I'm really excited to be here because I'm almost never on the being interviewed side. This might only be my second time ever having somebody ask me questions. So,
I always love that. I always love when people say that because I think that it's such a unique place to be in when you're the one that is steering the conversation and then now to sit in on it. I always love being able to do that with people. So thank you for being here. And I know this is going to be a conversation that might lead us into very many avenues. It might require a lot of vulnerability. So I want to preface it by saying thank you for showing up and for wanting to talk about something like respect and disrespect with me.
oh, thank you. And thank you for creating this platform and this space for these conversations. But also, I think offline, outside of this discussion, you've been a big part of my journey to being at the place where I can talk about this with you and be vulnerable in such a public way.
Aw, I'm glad to hear that. So I said in the intro that, even though you and I are not the same age. We're so similar still, and we're going through like such similar things. But I always think like I look at you and I like see my so much of myself in you. And I know you said that to me before too. And so it's just so interesting that we can, even though we're in different parts of our lives, we can still come together and have this conversation. Something else that I talked about in the intro was, I love looking up like definitions of words and things. And the title of this episode is Let's Talk Disrespect. So, what I did before we started this episode is I looked up the definition of the word disrespect. And it's interesting because the first thing that comes up, in a definition for disrespect is like the lack of respect. It always goes back to respect. So I think if we're going to talk about disrespect, we have to talk about respect first and foremost. And you and I were hanging out a few weeks ago, and you said to me, "Well, Harpo, how would I know if I was being disrespected if I didn't even know what my boundaries for respect were?" And I was thinking about that a lot when I was reading the definition of the word disrespect, because it's right there in the definition too. If you don't even know what respect is, if you don't even know the parameters of what you want respect to feel like, how would you ever know if you're being disrespected? I think, it was so indicative of what you had said to me. I'm going to say it again. How would I know if I was being disrespected if I didn't even know my boundaries for respect? I want to ask you, how much of the disrespect we experience is actually our fault then, if we don't even have a concept of respect to begin with?
So I think the interesting thing with respect and disrespect for me, I'm going to step back for 1 second before I talk about how we invite disrespect into our lives. I think something that I have recognized is I grew up in an environment where respect and disrespect were always taught in very action forward ways. Like you don't raise your voice, you don't talk back to elders, you don't say tu, you say tu si, like they had very specific definitions. And I kind of just collected that my whole life and thought that, if you're not rude in your tone of voice, if you don't challenge people, if you don't raise your voice, that's respect. And I think, in terms of the conversation we're having today and the conversations you and I have been having, what I have started to realize is respect goes so much farther than just those actions. Respect is how you value somebody's time, how you value their place in your life, how you show up for them, how you celebrate them, how you call them in when they're not saying things that you agree with. Like all those little actions are also a part of respect, but I didn't think of it that way. And that's why I think, you know, I don't wanna say to anybody, like, it's your fault that someone's disrespecting you, but I know that in my life, I've constantly been inviting in a certain type of disrespect because, like you said, and like I said that day, I had no idea that what I kept saying was my hurt feelings wasn't my hurt feelings. It was a lack of boundary. It was me not saying to people, "Hey, when you make a commitment to me and you don't fulfill that commitment, it's not about you hurting my feelings, it's about you disrespecting my time." I just didn't know that was the language around it. I thought I was too sensitive. And, when someone didn't applaud me for an achievement, or when someone in my, close circle didn't show up for me the way I wanted them to, or was constantly late or changing plans, I thought I was too sensitive. And I was always saying to myself, you always have hurt feelings. But it was actually that I was being disrespected.
I feel like a light bulb just went off in my head while you were talking about that. It's like, so when you say it's an act, like even when I was looking at the definition of disrespect, it comes up first as a noun and then as a verb. It's like this disrespect is something that you do. It's not something that is. And it's the disrespect is in all of those actions of, like you said, like, not showing up or not celebrating or speaking to in a certain way. And then the other thing that I was thinking about when you initially started talking is that so much of our definition of respect and disrespect is actually rooted in this concept of fear. For me, um being perceived as respectful always came as being fearful of my elders. Like I have, I'm not going to speak up against them, or I'm going to keep quiet because I am scared of the consequences of the disrespect that comes with doing the complete opposite, speaking out, actually having an opinion, doing what I want. And even now, like as I'm navigating a world as an adult where I'm not necessarily interacting with only elders anymore, I am, constantly being met with my peers, people my age, people younger too. um I feel like sometimes I've heard here and there, and I think that my experience around respect and disrespect is rooted in so much fear, to say I'm only going to respect this person if I'm scared of them or scared of X, Y, and Z that will result of not respecting them. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's
No,
making
it
sense.
it makes absolute sense, and I think part of that goes back to growing up in a culture where elder respect, even if they weren't respecting you, was required. And I think part of it is like I'm a people pleaser, and I want nothing more than people to like me. And when you're that kind of a person, which I think you and I have as a similarity, is that it's so hard to have that moment to recognize that, wait a minute, this is not okay, and it's okay for me to tell this person that what you're doing right now is disrespectful. And I think the word has such a bad rep, like it seems like such a huge accusation to say to someone like you were disrespectful to me,
Hmm.
but really it shouldn't. It's an action. It's no different than saying, "Hey, you were rude to me," or "You were not nice to me," or "You were late." I don't know. Like it was a thing that and again, now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm thinking, wait, that sounds very blameful. But in either case, I don't know why are we afraid in a relationship, whether it's with a parent or a friend or a coworker, to just say, "Hey, I'm not feeling respected right now."
Hmm. Yeah. I think for me, it's always been like, to say that, you've been disrespectful means that there is an exception, that a boundary has not been maintained or a boundary hasn't been respected. And now I have to set up a boundary. And often with boundaries come change. And, the change in the relationship can feel daunting. Like sometimes I feel like disrespect for me has come from some of my closest relationships, and in those closest relationships where boundaries should have been the most important, but that's exactly where the boundaries were lacking. And now to set up a boundary in this very close relationship where a pattern of disrespect has been continued, means that either I'm going to have to change or this person's going to change, but regardless, the dynamic of this relationship is going to change. And I don't know if we're still going to be close. I don't know if we're still going to have that intimacy with the boundary in the middle of it. Now it's kind of like, setting up a road in the middle of a park. Like, it might be super
Mhm.
useful to set up that road in the middle of the park, but we're still going to be reminiscing about the way that the park was before that road was built through it.
Yes, yes to everything you just said, because it's so relevant in my life, and I feel like in every decade of my life, for your listeners, I will say I am 40, and I feel that in every decade of my life, I have had a transformational relationship like this, where I have gotten to a place in a relationship where I've realized, wait, this doesn't feel right, it doesn't sit right. And this is the first year that I've actually learned to use the language of respect and disrespect. I didn't know this language before, but when you do draw that boundary, there's a couple of things. One is that I take ownership of the fact that I didn't draw the boundary before. And I understand that as hard as it is for me, it's sometimes really hard for the person who's kind of feeling like, but wait, this wasn't the rule before.
Hmm.
And now you've just changed the rule. You've broken our flow, for lack of better words, like you just said. And I think that is a real valid fear. And I think you and I have both been in situations where establishing a boundary has created a huge shift in relationships. And it's hard because what you just said about reminiscing, it so defines how I felt sometimes. I have looked back and thought to myself, if I could just have put up with that one thing, everything could have been the same. We could have still been, the way we were at that time. But then I think about myself, and I think about, if I'm not respecting myself, if I'm asking of myself that, hey, just take that behavior and accept it and work with it, then how am I even going to ask somebody else to respect me? I'm not modeling respect for myself.
Yeah, I love the word ownership. I think that that word is a lot better than the word fault. This is an episode that's really rooted in words today. But I think that the word ownership is so much better than the word fault because, like you said, I can take ownership for the way that I've enabled someone to treat me, and I can take ownership of the lack of boundaries that I had around the parameters of what I feel is respectful and disrespectful. I think when we start to take ownership of that and we take our power back, I think that is when we can start to really experience respect in the most respectful way, for lack of a better word, as well. Like that respect that is not rooted in fear, that is not rooted in a lack of love. And respect is a form of love. I think that's something that I've
Yes.
really been trying to learn and to navigate, is that respect is actually a form of love when you give it and receive it. Because if you truly, I think, like, respect in different ways. I think there's self-respect and then there's outer respect. But if you can't even have a concept of respect for yourself, I think that's also why we're having, if I zoom out and I think about why we're having this conversation in this season, this entire season is about what does it mean to actually love yourself? I think what it means to actually love yourself is to first and foremost have a concept of self-respect, to say, here is how I'm going to respect myself and show up for myself. And if that level and that version of self respect is strong, then it will automatically permeate everything in your life. And if you're respecting yourself, then other people will also want to respect you.
Yes, absolutely. I think for me this season of my life has been really a lot about looking at again how I had allowed for or invited in some of these situations in my life. And I think, going way back to what you said at the beginning, for me, I have definitely recognized that not knowing my own boundaries, not having my own sort of set of rules of what my basics of respect are, and not defining those boundaries really led to being in a place where I was in a lot of relationships where I felt disrespected. And it was when I pulled back and had sort of that realization that I was able to start thinking about what respect looks like, even.
Yeah, and like you said this earlier, that you're a people pleaser. And I just want to say that this episode is for all the people pleasers, it's for all the warm personalities and like the overly forgiving and giving people. This episode is for us. And I
Yes.
feel like when you're the kind of person that doesn't want to like rock the boat, sometimes that sea of water that our boat is hanging out in can actually drown us. Like if you're like, no, I'm not going to rock the boat, I'm not going to be confrontational, I'm not going to say anything, that's when we can sometimes run into trouble. And it's funny because I always think to myself, I'm like, but I'm so nice. Like, I'm so warm. I'm so kind. How come I keep getting hit with all this bullshit and this disrespect? But I think, again, it comes back to the fact that you can't just be like a bottomless pit of giving, right? You have to cap it somehow in a way where it serves both you and the people in your life. Like, even being this overly giving and forgiving person is actually not conducive and healthy for all the relationships in your life, because you're essentially teaching people in your life to just keep taking and taking without any regard for how it might be impacting you.
Absolutely. And I think, what I've learned over the years about people pleasing, if I look at my 20-year-old self, and I used to have a really similar inner dialogue where I used to think to myself, but I'm so nice and like I'm so kind and caring and giving. Why, like you said, why does this happen to me? And at this point in my life, I also realized that my need to be a people pleaser is also enabling bad behaviors in people sometimes. Like
Hmm.
my not saying to that person the very first time that that language or that behavior is disrespectful, I don't appreciate it, is enabling that person's behavior. So, the flip to look at it is I am a good person, but good at what cost, like, and what is the motivation? Like, is it more important to me that I be able to check a box at night that said, I'm so nice, I never said anything mean to anybody today? Or is it more important for me to be able to check a box at night that said, I was honest to myself and I was honest to my friends and I respect my friends and relationships enough and my
Hmm.
people in my life enough to say, listen, if I hold you to this, if I say this, you can hear it.
Right.
Like it's also a reflection of how good am I seeing the people around me if I'm not giving them the opportunity to see
Right.
that mirror. Wow. I just said something
Mhm.
that I needed to learn.
Say it one more time so we can both sit in
Uh,
it.
How good am I if I'm not seeing the goodness and ability in others to be able to handle the truth when I share it with them?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm gonna have to sit with that one.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about when you were talking is that, I don't know about you, but I think a lot of us brown girls, I'm just going to be very explicit about it. A lot of us brown girls have seen the women in our families, especially our moms, be disrespected, right? Our moms, our
Hmm.
grandmothers, our aunts, like women in our immediate circle be disrespected by one another and by the men in their lives and their children too. If I could say honestly that all the women in my life have been very respected by all, even their children, that's a lie. Um, and so this pattern of disrespect has just been omitted, especially in my life, just by seeing, the women in my life and how they take disrespect. I can see that it hurts them. I can see that they're upset by it. It's not that they're okay with it, but I think that the lack of action after that hurt, or the lack of action after the period of disrespect, or that whether it's a conversation, it's a comment, it's an action, the lack of doing something has always like left me really stumped, because I feel like I can understand when someone's being disrespectful towards me. I can understand when a comment hurts me or like anything. But I think because I actually haven't seen anything be done of it, I actually don't know what to do about it either in my life. I mean, I have to like seek external um support and guidance in actually rectifying the disrespect that I'm experiencing. Like I can honestly say that, anytime something has happened in front of me to the women in my life, we both look at each other, we make eye contact, we know it was wrong, but there's such a lack of action. And I don't want to say that to blame any of the women, because sometimes, like, I mean, I don't know what to do with it either now that I'm experiencing it, because it's so learned and it's over time. But I just wonder sometimes, I'm like, what would my life have looked like if I had actively seen disrespect be, like you said, like that first comment have said something, at the first time someone made me feel some way, have said something or done something. I wonder what my life would have been like.
Oh, yeah. That's um that's a deep one. I think I have similar sentiment, my mother had a difficult life, for lack of better words. Like, she went through her share of trauma, as did my grandmother, and her whole life my mother has sort of tried to, not only when she's been disrespected, not respond, but quite often try and please the disrespecter. And I think that was
Yes,
such a
that one.
hard.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, like, not only were you just disrespected and you didn't do anything about it, and in some cases I can understand, there are times when it's actually your your safety, your children's safety that you're worried about. But on the other hand, then to try and please the disrespecter, it just was such a complicated way to grow up. And I think I am really actually, I was going to say lucky, and I try not to use that word. I'm actually really proud of myself in my marriage, the way that I have been able to sort of establish the boundaries with my spouse and him with me. I think somehow I was able to make that shift in that space. But in other parts of my life, with older relatives, with other family members, with female friendships, I haven't been able to figure it out. And like you're saying, sometimes I find myself standing in these spots thinking, why is this so hard? Like, why can't I just say the thing? Or why can't I figure out the next step? And I do wonder, my 40-year-old self looks at Harpo and thinks, if I knew everything I knew now, would I have been Harpo when I was 20? Like, that's, I see your fearlessness and I think that's what I would have been. But then I
Hmm.
also sort of think, like, it's a process. Like, we're all healing through this process together. And my time was now and your time is now too.
Hmm. But it's also no coincidence that like we became friends and came into each other's lives at the time that we did, because we both were learning the lessons around the same time and we needed one another. Like, like for you to look at me and think this is the way that perhaps I would have been, and for me to look at you now and to finally have like a map, to finally have a sort of outline of how I can do those things, because we're learning at the same time, because it was just so interesting that you and I were both experiencing this like idea of disrespect, and trying to like really navigate it and define it for ourselves around the same time. um I think you and I have talked now about how the root of all of this is likely a combination of like not having boundaries, letting disrespect slide until, one day it's too much. And then most of all, I think this like, desire to, like even when you've said, when you saw, let's say, your mom being disrespected and pleasing the disrespecter, 100%, because I felt like it always came back to this guilt. I could just sense this guilt in my mother, and I
Mhm.
could sense this guilt inside of me that, oh my gosh, I have hurt this person. Now I'm guilty because it goes against who I actually am, which is this nice person who doesn't hurt other people. And so that overwhelming guilt is what usually drove the extra pleasing, right? The extra like
Mhm.
pushing aside the disrespect that I was experiencing to say, this entire thing that has happened actually doesn't align with who I think I am, because the person that I think I am doesn't actually hurt other people, doesn't actually start the conflict. That person manages the conflict. And now that I'm this person who has caused hurt or whatever by voicing the disrespect, it always like didn't it, I think that's what drove the extra people pleasing for me. So a lot of guilt actually drove the letting go of the disrespect, because it was easier for me to be disrespected than it was to feel guilty, because I hate feeling guilt. I mean, my entire brown girl guilt is rooted in the idea of deconstructing guilt.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, because I think it's really important that we actually identify and address, what I said about seeing the disrespect but then not knowing what to do with it. I wanted to ask you, and this might be a thing that you're still working on, you don't have to have an answer for it, but how are you combating this pattern of disrespect that you might have learned or picked up on? And what are you not letting go forward now in your boundaries? And how are you going to perhaps change the narrative of respect and disrespect in your life now moving forward?
So I've put a lot of thought into this in the last few months. And one of the things I've come to realize, and I feel like I've said this already in the episode, I'm kind of repeating myself, is that because I didn't have that list, because I had never consciously thought about it, I think the first step for me, um, was to think about it. Like, what are my must haves for respect? And some of the things that I've come to realize for myself is that if someone is in my life, they must celebrate me as I will celebrate them. I have
Mhm.
learned this about myself that, I want to be in spaces where I feel welcome wholly. I don't want to feel judged. I don't want to feel like I have to constantly validate my deserving to be there. These are little things that I've thought a lot about. And I've thought about, how am I going to, like you just said, how am I going to make sure that this is happening in my life? So, two big takeaways I have is that one, I'm going to do a better job of modeling the behaviors I want from others. So, I'm really trying to catch myself and make sure, they say a lot of times things that bother us about other people are mirrors of what we're doing. So, I'm trying to be
Mhm.
very thoughtful about making sure that I'm modeling the behaviors that I want from other people. And then the second thing is that I'm working really hard on stopping in the moment when something bothers me. So I have a colleague I work with every day. We've worked together for like 7 years. And I've been practicing this at work where sometimes he'll say something and it's just a simple thing. It means nothing. He's a wonderful human being. Like he doesn't even realize what he's saying might shift my thought process for the entire day and I'm going to overthink it. So I've been practicing sort of stopping that conversation and saying, "Hey, can I just tell you that this thing you just said, I didn't really love it. I didn't like this." And I've
Mhm.
noticed that instantaneously he'll say to me, "Oh, shoot, I didn't even realize that." And I think that for me was such a eye opener. And I think it's really helped me to have a test subject to test this on, and that to a person who's so kind. And I think like for me the big thing moving forward is that I'm going to try. It's my commitment to myself. I can't say I'm perfect at it. I'm going to try in the moment when something doesn't sit right to just trust that I am a nice, kind, good, warm person. And I'm probably going to ask for respect with respect. I have this great fear of upsetting somebody by asking for respect. But I think if we genuinely believe that thing about ourselves, that we're kind, we're caring, we're good, then we also have to believe that if we have to stop someone and say, "Hey, I didn't really like what you said," we're going to say it in a really nice, thoughtful, caring way.
Yeah, and I love what you said. Ask for respect with respect. I think that, asking for respect from yourself and from others is a radical act of self love. It's to show yourself that, hey, I'm committed to you and I'm committed to having a very pleasurable experience through this journey. And along that way, the word respect and feelings of respect and relationships that are rooted in respect, are going to be there. I love this one quote from the movie English Vinglish, and it's Sri Devi at the end, and she's making a speech, and she says, "It's not that I didn't have love in my life. I didn't have respect in my life. It's not that I didn't have love in those relationships. It's that I didn't have respect in those relationships." And I think those are two very different things. We can still love ourselves and we can still love other people, and others can still love us and still not be respectful. But it's okay for you to ask for respect. I'm not going to say demand respect. I think that there's this saying that, we'll say to, like, girls will often say this to their friends, like, nah, you need to demand respect from him. No, I don't think you demand respect. I think it's what Raj, you just said, is that you ask for respect with respect. And I love the idea of responding and not reacting. So just taking a step back and asking yourself, how does this make me feel, and how do I want to now move forward with it? Do I want to respond in this way or that way? I think all of that has so much to do with it. Um, I wanted to ask you one last question because I think that it's important for me to just have this question out in the world. You've got a daughter, Zara, who is a teenager, and we've talked a lot about how, for me at least, I shared and you shared as well, and perhaps some listeners will have similar experiences where their patterns of, or their understandings of respect and disrespect were rooted in their homes and the ways that their moms modeled both those things to them. And I wonder how might you also be teaching and modeling boundaries around respect to Zara, your daughter, and what you might be learning about boundaries and respect from her too, because I think the mother-daughter relationship is one of such reciprocity. I think we're all learning from one another all the time.
I think this question is hard for me to answer because my greatest project in my life is raising my kids. And I put a lot of sort of pressure on myself to not repeat things that happened in my childhood or repeat cycles. So with Zara, my goal as a mother has always been to let her be her. And it's not
Hmm.
always easy as a mom to not give your opinion or your insight. When it comes to respect, there's a wonderful thing I've noticed about Zara and young girls her age today is that I think there's such a sense of knowingness of themselves at such a young age. And I give credit, maybe it is women of my generation that are, lifting some of those restrictions about how to be, what to wear, how to talk, that's giving them this confidence. But I've often noticed in her that she has this inbuilt ability to say, this is wrong and this is right. And I recently went through a really difficult situation in my life, and I was making a difficult personal choice. And I've shared this with you before, Harpo. An
Hmm.
incident happened, and she got up off her chair and she came over and gave me a hug. And she said to me, "No, this is not okay." And the fact
Hmm.
that my 14-year-old daughter was my mirror to tell me, like, this is not okay. And later we talked about it, and she said, you would not let someone treat me this way. If this happened, you would
Hmm.
tell me to say something, and you're not saying something. And I think for me, I don't know if this is advice because I won't know till they grow up if they turned out okay. Like, right now it feels like it. But I think if there's one thing I can say to someone with like young daughters is that one is I try not to bring my drama ever to my relationship with her. I think a lot of
Hmm.
us grew up in homes where our moms shared way too much with us for our young years. So I try not to come at her when I'm really upset with the first thoughts, but I do try
Mhm.
and have conversations with her and a lot and say, if I'm in this situation, what's your opinion? And I have found that her opinion is just so good. Like they're so
Yeah.
smart. So I try and like bring her along, but after I've calmed down or cooled down if it's a tough situation.
I love that. I actually sat with my mom recently too, and she was sharing something with me. And I said, Mom, you would never let anyone else treat me this way. Like, you would never let someone in my life speak to me this way. If I came to you and I said, Mom, so and so said this to me, you'd be like, let's go fuck up so and so. But you are not doing that for yourself. And so I guess that's the beauty of the mother daughter relationship, that, like, again, we're like constantly learning from one another. But whether it's the good or the bad, I think that like you said it perfectly. She was your mirror. And I think we all are one another's mirrors. But thank you so much for doing this episode with me, Raj. I think that this is the best conversation around respect and disrespect that I could have had. And I think that it's because you and I have been and are still actively doing the work on navigating it. I think you said it perfectly, that you're not perfect at it. You're not there yet. You're still working through it. I think I'm also still working through it. I don't think it's something that you just automatically wake up to one day and have mastered. But like you said, if you don't even have a consciousness of it, you can't really start to make changes. So hopefully, this episode has acted as just maybe a spark of consciousness for some of you in recognizing how you let respect and disrespect show up in your life. And if you've made it this far and you have learned a ton, that's it. That was the point of this entire episode.
Thank you so much for inviting me on today. This was a really great conversation. And I honestly have to say, because we've had a few conversations before today's talk, I thought I came into this knowing everything that I wanted to share and knowing everything I wanted to talk about. But I'm stepping away from this with so many learnings for myself. So thank you so much for that, Harpo.
Oh, I love that. That's all that this is. This is just a space for us to, like, learn more about ourselves. And we always say that this entire thing at Brown Girl Guilt is like just a reflection of, like, our journeys back home to ourselves. And I think that you saying that is just a testament to that. Like, we can learn something about ourselves in every situation, should we be open to it. So thank you so much for being here, Raj. I am so in awe of you all the time.